Welcome to today's Explainer. We usually think of disasters as things we can see coming, right? Like a hurricane showing up on the radar, or at least a threat we're actively preparing for, like earthquakes out in California. But what if I told you our greatest vulnerability is actually a threat we've just collectively decided to forget about? Let's dive right into the hidden, sleeping giant sitting right under our feet, the New Madrid seismic zone.
The absolute core of our issue today boils down to this. The New Madrid seismic zone hasn't made major headlines in over 200 years. And honestly, that's exactly the problem. We're suffering from a really dangerous kind of generational amnesia. Because this fault line, which runs straight beneath the American Midwest through Missouri, Tennessee, Kentucky, and Arkansas, it isn't just some minor geological quirk. It is fully active. And to understand what's coming, we really have to look back at what already happened.
Now these events, they're going to sound like wild myths or massive exaggerations, but they are recorded historical facts. On December 16, 1811, the earth beneath the Mississippi River Valley moved with such impossible, violent force that the Mississippi River literally reversed its flow for several hours. Just let that sink in for a second. Church bells were ringing in Boston, 1,100 miles away, triggered purely by the ground shaking. Chimneys were collapsing over in Cincinnati, and massive 30-foot sand geysers were just erupting right out of Missouri farm fields. To really wrap our heads around this, listen to this incredible first-hand account. John Bradbury, a Scottish botanist, was actually traveling the river by keelboat that exact night. He wrote that the river rose like a great wave, and the noise was the most terrible he had ever heard. The banks were literally caving in, entire acres at a time. I mean, Bradbury was essentially riding out a magnitude 8.0 earthquake from a rowboat in the middle of a churning, roaring Mississippi River, completely surrounded by the smell of sulfur. It's like something out of an apocalyptic movie.
And on land, it was arguably even worse. Eliza Bryan, a school teacher in New Madrid, Missouri, documented the terror by candlelight. She described the earth just opening up in these large fissures that swallowed trees whole, and the air filling with that same unexplainable sulfurous smell. Her town was so utterly destroyed by the heaving ground that it was completely swallowed up. They had to rebuild from absolutely nothing.
Because you have to remember, this wasn't just one freak isolated event, it was a sequence. December 16th, January 23rd, and February 7th. 3 massive quakes, each estimated between a magnitude 7.5 and 8.0, just closing in like a fist. That final one in February was so incredibly powerful, it dropped the land surface by 15 feet in a matter of seconds. It instantly created Reelfoot Lake down in Tennessee, literally a lake that did not exist on Monday, was just there on Tuesday.
The sheer psychological toll of all this is perfectly captured by a Kentucky farmer named George Christ. By February, the earth hadn't stopped moving for more than a few hours at a time. He wrote, "I did not know if God was trying to destroy the world or if the world was doing it itself." He had no scientific framework for what was happening. His family was just completely terrified. But here is the absolutely critical thing we need to remember. When all of this went down, the population of that entire affected region was roughly 5,000 people.
Today, that number is 7 million. 7 million people are living right on top of this exact same fault line today. We have built these massive, modern, bustling metropolises directly over a zone that's capable of altering the geography of the Earth in seconds. Memphis alone has a metro population approaching 1.3 million, and St. Louis has 2.8 million.
So, the crucial takeaway here is understanding the actual ground these 7 million people are living on. Look, when we think of earthquakes, our minds immediately go to California, right? But San Francisco sits on hard, ancient granite. When it shakes, that dense rock rapidly dissipates the seismic energy. Memphis, on the other hand, sits on ancient rift rock that is buried under 60 feet of soft river sediment, laid down over millions of years by the Mississippi River.
And that soft sediment? That is the deadly detail almost nobody talks about. Seismologists call this site amplification. Because the ground is so soft, it doesn't absorb the shaking at all, it actively amplifies it. This means a magnitude 7.0 earthquake on the New Madrid fault doesn't behave like a 7.0 out in California. It behaves like something considerably larger. The ground essentially turns that seismic energy into this slow-rolling building amplifier.
And sitting right on top of that acoustic amplifier is the critical infrastructure spine for the entire United States. Seriously, the numbers here are staggering. We are looking at a massive national choke point.
This region has 15 times more interstate highway mileage per capita than the West Coast. The Mississippi River right here carries 60% of all U.S. grain exports. You've got over 2,500 bridges and roughly 50 nuclear facilities, all within the projected shaking radius. Oh, and those natural gas pipelines crisscrossing beneath the river? They weren't engineered for earthquakes, simply because engineers just assumed the fault was dormant.
But we know it is absolutely not dormant. The United States Geological Survey actually registers 150 to 200 small quakes here every single year. And geologists estimate the recurrence interval for a major event, we're talking magnitude 7.5 or greater, is somewhere between 200 and 500 years. The last major sequence ended in 1812. That was exactly 213 years ago. So we are officially inside the window.
This exact reality is why FEMA ran a catastrophic planning scenario for this specific fault line. And when portions of their plan became available, the projections were just staggering. A worst-case event projects 86,000 casualties, 715,000 displaced households, 3,500 bridges completely damaged or destroyed, 15 major river crossings rendered totally impassable, and honestly, worst of all, a recovery timeline not measured in months, but estimated by modelers to take a full decade. A whole decade just to restore regional transport capacity.
But wait, because FEMA didn't publicly lead with the most horrifying detail. It goes right back to that soft sediment we talked about earlier. When a massive quake hits, that flat alluvial plain won't just shake. It will undergo what engineers call liquefaction. Basically, the ground actually stops behaving like solid earth and starts behaving like a dense fluid. So buildings won't just fall sideways. Their foundations will find nothing solid beneath them, and they'll just sink vertically. Roads will literally open up and swallow vehicles whole.
Now think about what liquefaction does to underground pipes. It completely shears them right at their joints. The Memphis utility has already publicly acknowledged that their water distribution mains are not seismically reinforced. In a major event, 600,000 people lose water service on day one. Within hours, fighting fires becomes functionally impossible. Remember, the 1906 San Francisco fires destroyed far more of the city than the actual quake did, and they actually had intact water pressure on hard granite for those first critical minutes. Memphis is sitting on something far, far less forgiving.
If you want a tiny preview of the commercial nightmare this would cause, just look back at what happened in April 2021. A routine inspection found a single fracture in one steel beam on the Hernando de Soto Bridge in Memphis. They closed it down for 67 days. Just that one bridge closure caused national supply chain disruptions within 72 hours. A new Madrid event wouldn't close one bridge. It would simultaneously close every single bridge in the zone, completely halting national grain, petroleum, and freight transport for weeks or even months. And this brings us to a pretty harsh reality check. Places like California and Japan have spent decades and hundreds of billions of dollars on mandatory retrofits, hospital upgrades, and sophisticated early warning systems. But the Midwest? They've kind of been treating this as a problem for another generation to deal with. Building codes across Missouri, Tennessee, Arkansas, and Kentucky weren't even comprehensively updated to modern seismic standards until the 1990s. So basically, everything built before then just assumed the fault wouldn't move in our lifetimes.
And making that assumption is so tragic, especially since we were warned. Way back in 1699, the native Chickasaw people told French explorer Jean-Baptiste Le Moyne de Bienville that the ground there shook violently. They had oral traditions of quakes long before European contact, and modern soil analysis actually confirms this. The zone has been active for at least 2,000 years. The Chickasaw knew, they recorded it, but European settlers arrived, built their towns, and just forgot. The forgetting is honestly as dangerous as the fault line itself.
And the burden of this forgetting? It falls heaviest on the most vulnerable. The communities sitting directly above the highest hazard zones are among the least resourced in the entire United States. We're talking about Mississippi Delta counties with 25 to 35% poverty rates, rural hospitals that are already strained way below minimum standards, emergency management offices operating with fewer than 5 people on staff. The population least able to evacuate or rebuild is sitting directly in the crosshairs of the largest potential ground motion.
So we really have to ask ourselves, how does a fault zone capable of reversing the mighty Mississippi River and dropping an entire lake into existence overnight sit beneath 7 million people today with no federal early warning system in place? How does a FEMA scenario projecting 86,000 casualties and simultaneous water failure across 7 states remain something that the vast majority of those 7 million people have never even been told about? The ground beneath Memphis hasn't moved significantly in 213 years, but that soft sediment is still there. The buried rift is still there. The accumulated stress hasn't gone anywhere. Somewhere beneath the boot heel of Missouri, the flat fields of Arkansas, and the brown surface of the Mississippi, the fault is doing exactly what faults do in the long silence between movements. It's loading. It is patient. The river that ran backwards once is still flowing south tonight. The pause is 213 years old. The bells rang in Boston last time. Who will hear them coming next?